Hey, well, greetings again, everyone, and welcome to this week's C Lock webinar series. And this week we're going to be talking about measuring feed intake and animal performance with our SmartFeed and SmartScale system. Again, my name's Ted Cunningham. I am the manager of beef systems and solutions for C Lock Incorporated. I'm going to be your presenter again this week. But on behalf of all of our team at C Lock Incorporated, we really want to thank you again for joining us for this series. Just again, before we get started, we do want to cover just a couple of items here. We do want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded today, and that this recording for this webinar, as well as all of our past webinars from last week, which covered our measuring or controlling intake, and then our series on our green feed that we held back in April, as well as all of the slide sets for all of these webinars are available. You can reach Carla Roseanne. She'll get you that information and links for those webinars, or you can always contact us at contact@clockinc.com. Also, we do welcome your questions, and the best way to address those questions is to use the chat box or the chat section there of the GoToWebinar interface. If you're joining us from a phone line, you have questions, feel free to email us at contact@clockinc.com. Do want to make sure that if you're joining us for the first time this week, that we take a moment to make sure you're aware of our equipment grant opportunity for up to $100,000 in C Lock equipment. The focus of this equipment grant is to provide or is to research and identify methods to improve efficiency, productivity, and sustainability with C Lock systems. And so we're looking for a 3 to 5 page research proposal, and the deadline for submitting those proposals is June 26th. One thing to make sure and highlight is that your research proposal should have a focus on applications that have a very strong potential for providing a return on investment to livestock producers. So please make sure you address that aspect in your proposal. Again, if you have questions or would like more information about this opportunity, feel free to contact us at contact@clockinc.com, or feel free to give us a call as well. So kind of like last week, as part of this webinar, we're again going to be asking a few polling questions. Again, these polls are voluntary, but we greatly appreciate your input and response. So the first poll question asks, really, what is your primary interest in regards to feed intake measurement? So we'll give you a few different options there, and we'll keep the polls open for a moment, and appreciate your input from that.
We'll give it just a few more seconds here. All right. And it looks like a majority, 88%, voted research in university and institution, 8% research in industry, and 4% feed efficiency testing.
Well, great. I think that's to some extent what we probably expected, was that the majority of our audience today and throughout these webinars has been very research oriented. And so appreciate you participating and letting us kind of confirm and affirm that that's our audience for today, and we'll kind of proceed here. So start off with just a quick outline, and we want to make sure we do have that opportunity to discuss really the design and function and capabilities of the SmartFeed and SmartScale today. And then we're also going to just talk a little bit about how we use that SmartScale and some of the data that would be behind that. Talk a little bit about that in reference to improved opportunities to test for efficiency and reducing the number of days that are required. Kind of round out today's webinar, just talking a little bit and just having a little discussion about some things that can help us move the efficiency needle in terms of the beef and dairy industry. But certainly did want to start off, and I know this may be just a little redundant if you joined us last week, but for those of you who are joining us for the first time this week, we did want to cover kind of the commonalities of C Lock technology. And so regardless, again, of what C Lock system we talk about, there are these shared features across all of our technology. And the first shared feature is really that all of our systems are wireless, they're portable, and they're modular. And so wireless is really referring to the fact that there are no network cables, there's no central computers that are required whenever we install these systems. Each unit has its own onboard computer that communicates wirelessly through a Wi-Fi network or a cellular network if that Wi-Fi is unavailable. And so from there, the data is routed through the cloud, back through our central server, and it's available 24/7 to you through our login user interface, again, that you can access from any internet connected device. You know, a very important note as we just kind of touch on data is that our customers own the data. So you have access to both raw as well as the processed data throughout your research or testing periods. By being wireless, again, that also means these units are very easy to install, but it also means that they can be moved or relocated very easily. And that kind of ties into the term modular, which really refers to the ability of these units to stand alone. And so, you know, again, we can add additional units or additional C Lock technology to your network of systems, and those units will sync and operate together wirelessly. Just also mention that, of course, our systems are all powered by DC, and this enables our systems to be easily adapted to solar power, or certainly where we would have available AC. We can simply power those with the addition of a power converter. So just kind of some commonalities or some other shared features. In all of our systems, we use state-of-the-art RFID readers, and these are designed to operate again in these very noisy environments and, you know, with other types of technology that you may have. These RFID readers are compatible with any low-frequency EID tag. And this is just a really important feature when you consider, again, that your data collection is going to hinge upon a really good RFID read rate and reliability rate. The final thing I'd mention is that, again, we sell all of our systems with an annual service contract. And this basically acts as a full warranty for any of the components of your units. But perhaps more important is that this covers the data management, the unit monitoring, and the IT costs that our team has. One of the key things I point out is, again, as long as the service contract is maintained, we ensure that the units function properly for their lifespan. There are no future upgrade costs to hardware or software. And so we don't come back to you in 3 years or 5 years and require some upgrade cost. As long as that service contract is maintained, again, we ensure that they function as they should since the day they were shipped. So we'll start off today visiting about our SmartFeed bunk system for measuring feed intake. I think paramount to today's discussion is that we do point out that, you know, our goal as a company is to provide the most accurate and the most versatile system available for measuring feed intake, as well as the ability to track and measure feeding behavior and other parameters. So we do want to point out that these units, both our SmartFeed and SmartScale, are portable, as we've already mentioned, and they're very easy to set up. They really do not require any elaborate facilities to make them function properly. So again, we'll just start off today with pointing out a few of the key features of our SmartFeed bunks. And so this picture is of our research model SmartFeed system. And like all of our systems, each unit has its own control panel and computer. It utilizes really the best available components, technology, and design. You'll notice we mount our RFID readers on the head stanchion. And this prevents really any interference from the feed or the feed bunk itself. These units come standard with a single RFID antenna, which does mean you'll need to indicate which ear you plan to place the RFID tags in, or alternatively, we can add an additional RFID reader so that the animals can have an RFID tag in either ear and be compatible. Our research model does use the stainless steel bin. which allows us to include an access door, making it really easy to clean out this bin of any refused feed. And then, of course, across all of our SmartFeed applications, we use a high resolution 10-gram resolution scale system. So do want to also point out that our standard SmartFeed system is configurable and adjustable across a full range of animals that you might be feeding, anywhere from small ruminants all the way up to those large mature dairy or beef cattle. And again, aside from that head stanchion width and the height adjustability, we are also able to adjust the throat height, or that there is a small bin insert there that's stainless steel, and we can slide that up and down, allowing those small ruminants or smaller calves to be able to reach the bottom of that feed bin. We also offer several options for our feed bins, and so circled in red is our standard size feed bin. This is typically used for feeding or growing finishing age and size cattle. However, we do also offer a large bin, and this is designed to accommodate those diets that might be really low in density and contain high levels of roughage, or maybe they're just being used and being fed at a very high intake level to those larger or mature beef and dairy cattle. Our small bin works great for anyone planning to use the SmartFeed really exclusively for small ruminants, such as those sheep and goats. However, we would mention that our standard size bin does work well for small ruminants, with the addition of a bin insert, just kind of reduce the distance the animals would have to reach to access the back and far corners of the bin. Recently, we did release a new option for our SmartFeed, the poly bin option that we refer to as our seed stock or producer option. Again, this is designed to basically work very nicely with those growing age, feed efficiency testing age cattle. So anything that might be anywhere from 5 up to 18 or 20 months in age will work well with this bin system. Should point out, as we compare this to the research model, these units will have less adjustability and flexibility in use. And of course, when we go to the poly bin, we lose the clean out door for access. But of course, kind of those trade-offs is that we're able to price these at a lower price point. And as with all our systems, we offer solutions for portability and remote use. So on the left is a 2-unit SmartFeed trailer. This would be a really ideal system for doing some ad libitum mineral or ad lib supplement pasture-based research. And then on the right are a couple pictures of a solar kit that we can design and use to power up to 6 SmartFeed systems in a fence line where AC power may not be available, or it's just really inaccessible. So now that we've kind of covered our SmartFeed, let's switch over and talk a little bit about our SmartScale system. And so our SmartScale is designed to capture partial or front half animal weights each time the animal goes to water. We design and we build this system to fit your existing or planned water source. So the picture on this slide is just an example of how we configure a single opening SmartScale system around a water source. As with all our systems, these scales communicate wirelessly, and really they provide you with real-time weight and performance data at your fingertips through our login user web interface. As mentioned, again, we design these to fit your existing water source, and typically when we design these, we in a dry lot scenario, we would recommend one SmartScale for up to 50 animals. For this installation that's pictured on this slide, we needed some additional animal capacity, and so we designed a double scale unit around each water in each pen. The other thing to note is kind of from this top view, the lower right-hand corner picture here, is that you can see we have a really quick and easy adjustment system at the rear of that animal, or kind of at the flank of that animal. And so these units accommodate, various animal sizes and widths. The width adjustment feature ensures that only one animal can be on the scale at a time, but it also kind of helps to ensure that that animal is centered on the scale and doesn't slide a foot off the load cells when it's at the water or drinking. And so that's kind of a feature that we have as well. So why use SmartScale? You know, I think that's kind of a logical question, but before maybe we discuss those advantages and the why of why we would use SmartScale, let's visit maybe a little bit about some of the challenges that we encounter with traditional chute-based or total body weight measurements. You know, and perhaps the biggest challenge with a chute weight is that it's a single observation. And so if we assume the scale itself, the scale underneath the chute is properly calibrated, and the person reading the scale, of course, is doing so correctly, without a doubt, when that animal walks into that chute, you're likely going to receive a very accurate weight for that animal at that given moment in time. And but what if that animal that we just weighed, we decided to bring back and weigh 2 or 4 hours later? Would the weight be the same? And really the answer to that, of course, is no. And the reason, of course, is related to a number of factors, such as, you know, the time of day that we're weighing those animals, the feeding or grazing timings and routines, which ultimately lead to differences in room and fill. Certainly shrink as it might pertain to how those animals were handled, the time spent in holding pens prior to being weighed. And then we can even talk about environmental factors. And so the weather and cold versus warm, sunny versus raining, all of those things have a bearing on that chute weight and that single observation. You know, so this picture is of a set of bulls being gathered for weighing off of grass. You know, these bulls are 15 to 16 months old coming off of grass. And so we know they have a tremendous amount of variation from weight 8 to weight 8. Again, especially in terms of the time of day that those bulls are gathered, maybe what the temperature, what the environmental conditions might be, and as that pertains to the grazing behavior of those animals. So very easily, we could see as much as 75 pounds of fill differences just from one way to another with animals this size and weight. So as much as anything, we want to believe, you know, that chute weights are accurate, and without a doubt, good weighing protocols, which involve shrinking the weights or shrinking the animals, other systems where we get consecutive day weights, they do help remove some of the variation. But let's maybe talk now a little bit more about SmartScale and why it provides us with some advantages opposed to a chute weight. So again, as opposed to that chute weight that requires an animal to be removed from their home pen or from their home pasture, it requires those animals to be transferred to that holding or handling facility and then sent to a chute for an individual weight. The SmartScale has the capability of capturing that animal's partial body weight several times throughout the day, and really with no effect on animal behavior. So what this really means is that we can get a higher resolution of that animal performance data. So as each day passes and we gather more observations of that animal's weight, you get a really clear picture of what that animal's actual weight is, but really a better picture of what that animal's actual performance is at the end of your trial. So again, this is accomplished without additional handling and labor. It reduces stress on the animals. It prevents those changes in pen dynamics. And if we're talking about bulls, you know, anytime we take bulls to the chute, we risk injury and incidents where we'd have bulls that become lame or other issues. Just kind of another area of interest, really from the perspective of using the SmartScale as a tool for monitoring animal performance and management, as well as the opportunity to monitor animal health. And so aside from, you know, very quickly being able to use the SmartScale to assess individual animal performance, we can also use this system to find animals that maybe are tending to lose weight, but also maybe deviating from their normal watering behavior, which will really give you an opportunity to have an objective system for assessing the animal's health as well as the performance of that animal. So let's just take a look at some SmartScale and chute weight data. So to orient you to this slide, the blue bars represent average daily gain that would be based on the full body weights from a chute. And the orange bars would be the average daily gain that would be determined by our SmartScale system. The first set of bars on your left or closest to that y-axis is the comparison of the average daily gain across these pens of animals, which would be about 160 animals across this group. And so we're comparing that chute versus the SmartScale average daily gain. So if you look at that first set of bars, overall, you'll see that there's about 0.2 of a pound of difference in gain between the chute average daily gain and the SmartScale average daily gain. And the thing that you should probably note is really that trend holds very nicely and is really true across all of those pens, with the exception of one pen. So if you look at pen 4, you'll see that chute-based average daily gain actually was higher than the SmartScale. So it's unknown why this pen of cattle tended to have heavier chute weights and average daily gain than the SmartScale, but my guess would certainly be that there was something substantially different about the weighing conditions or the weighing process for that individual pen. Maybe that pen of cattle was routinely weighed first. Maybe they were weighed last. They just had the shortest amount of time in the holding area. It's really kind of hard to say. But again, overall, I think a conclusion from this slide is that weighing conditions using chute scales decreases the observed average daily gain. But the next slide that we'll show is really can illustrate where an individual animal can be affected. So this is again of one individual animal and his chute weight from that group of pens. And again, the chute weight derived average daily gain, and we're plotting that against the SmartScale weight-based average daily gain. So for this slide, chute weight is going to be shown as the orange squares with a trend line between the weigh-ups. SmartScale average daily weights are shown using the blue line. And then the SmartScale daily weights that correspond to the same chute weigh updates is shown using the gray bars. So also included in this chart we're providing you with the actual weigh ups from both the SmartScale and the chute there at the top of the chart. So if you look closely at that data, you'll see the calf and basically gained really uniformly and linearly through the first weigh updates. But if you look at that last chute weight, something happened. And so he only gained 22 pounds in his last 14 days of this trial period. So, you have to wonder, is that really correct? Or was that last chute weight incorrect? Well, SmartScale weight indicates that this calf was 31 pounds heavier than the chute on this weigh date. And using the same correction factor throughout this weighing period, this results in about 0.6 of a pound increase in average daily gain, which is pretty significant and literally will take this animal from being kind of at the bottom end of the performance group to around average for this pen of cattle. Again, this is just a quick illustration of how the SmartScale can really nicely and accurately assess animal weight, but really show how it can have a drastic effect on the gain and performance of these animals. So just a slide that kind of talks about how we go from partial body weight to full body weight, and some considerations related to some of the correlations or the correction factors that we use. We recognize that partial body weight correlations can be affected by several factors, including the age and size of the animal, the structure or the build of the animal, or other factors to consider. So, if you think about it, for instance, a young 6-month-old weaned bull will likely have proportionately different body mass and likely stand on a scale differently than a 14-month-old bull. That older bull will develop very differently as he reaches puberty and puts body mass proportionally in different areas, so to speak. Similarly, if we think about a 750-pound heavily dairy influenced steer, he's likely going to have a very different partial body weight than a 750-pound, heavily muscled beef steer. Also, as we use a system across multiple waters that may vary in height and design, there could also be differences that need to be accounted for at each unique water style and in height and design. So ultimately, we need to have at minimum, a partial body weight correction factor that's determined using average pin initial weight. So again, we would weigh that initial pin and compare that to the SmartScale weights and derive that correction factor for the trial period. So just to kind of run through some of the testing guidelines that we would recommend for doing a feed intake test for feed efficiency. And just to kind of start off, we want to make sure you know that we use the Beef Improvement Federation guidelines for developing our testing protocols and follow those pretty closely. We do also recognize that individual breed associations also have some different requirements for feed intake testing. So if you're working within a given breed, make sure and follow those breed guidelines for data submission and data entry. So just to kind of start off, we would start by thinking about how we would group these animals in terms of pin and contemporary groups. And so obviously, I think the first one's pretty intuitive. We need to make sure that these animals are of the same sex. We also need to make sure that when we test these animals, they're going to be of similar or the same breed composition. It's very important that we have some birth date information. We want to make sure that we don't have a huge age range across that pin. So we were looking for really a 60-day or less age variation across those animals. And then finally, we don't want drastic differences. And so we're trying to keep animals within about a 300-pound weight range whenever we put these pins and groups together to be tested. So just kind of some efficiency testing guidelines. And so again, this kind of comes right from the Beef Improvement Federation, and it basically indicates that for testing these animals, we have to have 45 days of valid intake data. And within that 45 days, at the front and end of that test, or the first 5 and the last 5 days of a test, we have to make sure we have at least one valid day of intake data. And so that really allows us to make sure we're covering the full spectrum of growth and intake levels across that animal for that time period, and we're not simply selecting that data from kind of the heart or the center of that time frame. So that's kind of for the intake side of it, a minimum of 45 days. And so from the standpoint of coupling that intake with gain, if all we're going to use are those chute weights, so at minimum, we would have to have 2 consecutive day chute weights at both the start and end of the trial. If that's our system we're using, we have to have at least 70 days of testing to get valid average daily gain. If we decide that we can use a SmartScale system, we can reduce that down to as little as 45 days. And so again, using that SmartScale, we're able to very nicely observe many observation points for weight and chart that animal's growth and get a much better feel for the trend of that animal's growth and compute his average daily gain more confidently. Even with the SmartScale, we still need to have, again, the initial full body weight. And certainly, it's recommended if there's questions in relation to the fill on those animals or how accurate those weights might be, we certainly recommend a consecutive day weighing procedure as well. And of course, finally, the testing guidelines would certainly require that all animals that are being tested have ad lib access to a common diet and as well as water throughout the testing period. Just a note on our recommended stocking rate, it is on average going to be 7 animals per smart feed for these growing age animals. If you have questions about that, maybe questions in relation to the size or age of the animals that you're using or the diet types, we'd be happy to visit with you and kind of give you some further recommendations about those stocking rates. Kind of the final area we'll just touch on is really the record keeping component of doing a feed intake test. And so Obviously, a few of the things that we need to keep track of, again, are those individual animal weights and dates. So when those animals went across the chute and were weighed, the start and end date tests of the start and end dates of the test will be important to make sure that we record and we communicate with you on. And then also we need to have kind of the base ingredient composition of that diet recorded. And at very minimum, we have to have a reported diet dry matter that these animals are receiving, because we're going to drive everything back to an adjusted dry matter basis. And certainly it's recommended, if at all possible, have that diet sent off to a commercial laboratory for a chemical analysis. And really the final thing would be to track how much feed you actually were delivering to those pens, so we can correlate that back and make sure that our SmartFeed systems are accounting for all of that feed that was delivered, and then also, of course, the amount of that feed that actually made it into the animals. Okay, let's kind of take just another quick poll here. And so this question is asking, which sector of the beef industry has the greatest potential for economic return from feed efficiency? And that'll kind of lead us into our closing kind of slides here, and give you a little food for thought here as we move forward.
We'll give it about 5 more seconds here. All righty. And the results are 20% say seed stock, 40% say feed yard, 15% say stocker backgrounder, and 25% say cow or calf.
Interesting. So, I think those results with the 40% or the majority feeling like the chief benefits of feed efficiency will go to the feed yard. I think that's kind of what we've been certainly programmed to believe, that is that feed efficiency is very much a terminally oriented type of trait. And, I think there's some opportunity to have some other thoughts and maybe some discussion around why that is. And, so as much as anything, we just kind of wanted to spend the last couple of slides to provide you with some thoughts and ideas in regards to maybe how we can rethink and maybe reinvigorate the cattle industry relative to feed efficiency. And, maybe the easiest way to start this discussion is just to understand some of the reasons why we've been slow to change and really slow to improve efficiency across the beef and dairy industries. And I think the first logical factor, is to point out that historically speaking, measuring intake and efficiency has been relatively challenging. It's certainly not been inexpensive. And, quite frankly, if measuring individual feed intake was easy, it was fast, and it was cheap, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion today. But the reality is we're several decades into measuring individual intake and individual efficiency. So it's certainly not unattainable, nor is it so expensive that it is simply cost prohibitive. So really, I think there has to be some other reasons why we're not seeing increased efficiency across our industry or adoption and application of this technology. So really kind of, in my opinion, I think the second bullet point is perhaps more to blame than anything. And that is that performance is much easier to measure than profit in the cattle industry. So I think for those of you who are maybe in the audience who work directly with cattle producers, you're going to probably agree when you work with those cattle producers that it's still pretty common to hear kind of the old adage that we still get paid by the pound. And while this adage or philosophy of we get paid by the pound is still to a very great extent a valid statement, I think it kind of speaks to the fact that most who are involved in the cattle business believe, that pounds or performance is what's driving profitability. So for example, if I wanted to quickly assess, the crude performance of a beef cattle or dairy operation, I could simply just look at the check stub that they had for the last calves that they sold, or the last milk that they sold. And that check's going to tell me really quickly how many pounds they produced or their performance for a given time frame. But the challenge really becomes that check tells me absolutely nothing about the profit for those operations. So if I'm a cattle producer and I decide I want a bigger check, or I decide I want to sell more pounds next year, how do I do it? And the reality is it's not hard to find an answer. If all I'm interested in is more pounds, more gross dollars, I can run more cows, I can buy more feed, I can buy or rent more land if it's available. We can hire more labor to help run all those cattle. Perhaps we can buy more bulls that have more genetic potential for growth. So there's lots of different options to move that needle. But what is it really going to cost me if I'm trying to incrementally improve performance? So again, kind of as an example, if I want to wean calves that are 25 pounds heavier at weaning this next year, what's it cost me to add that additional 25 pounds? It's not that additional 25 pounds is free. It either has to come as the result of more feed, perhaps fewer cows or lowering our stocking rate, or maybe, I guess, in the case of genetic improvement, we buy more expensive bulls that potentially have more genetic opportunity to inject more growth into these calves. As an industry, I think it's been pretty easy for us to focus on performance rather than profit, largely because performance is an easily observed measurement. And again, we look at that last check that you received for your cattle. It tells you about performance, but it tells you really nothing about profit. So as we think about performance and really improvements in gain versus efficiency, we've known as an industry for a long time that efficiency is a much bigger driver of profit than gain or growth and performance. So, from this little bullet point here, we see that it's easy to reference, and this data comes back from all the way goes back to 2001 and illustrates that a 10% improvement in gain equates to an 18% improvement in profit. And if we compare that to a 10% improvement in efficiency, we see that there's an opportunity for 43% improvement in profit by that selection criteria. So how do we make a change? It's a big question. It's one that I think from an industry perspective, again, we're trying to change things across all of the sectors, all of the players in our industry to really move the needle in terms of feed efficiency. So I believe the first thing we really have to do is dispel the myth that cattle that are feed efficient are really only valuable to the feed yard. And so my guess is that if you're able to visit with a commercial cow-calf producer today, and you ask them if they use feed efficiency as a selection tool for their bulls or for their replacement females, I think the response you're going to hear is that, those producers don't send their cattle to the feed yard. They don't retain ownership. Certainly there are producers who do, but the majority of producers don't retain ownership. And so feed efficiency is not really something that's going to be very important to those producers. So how do we as an industry improve feed efficiency if the commercial cow-calf producer, again, this is the producer who's supplying the cattle to the beef supply chain, if they don't see any value in feed efficiency? So I think we kind of have to begin to see this disconnect and then think about the goals of improving industry-wide feed efficiency and maybe changing our focus just a little bit on what we're trying to accomplish. And so again, kind of the reality is the vast majority, these producers don't retain ownership of those calves through the feeding phase. And, if we just continue to link feed efficiency to the feeding industry, or we link it basically and refer to it as a terminal trait, I don't think we're going to see any change. Ultimately, that commercial cattleman has to realize value from feed efficiency. And to date, that's just not really happened. And I think the only way it can happen is if we clearly demonstrate that feed efficiency is a valuable tool for creating a better cow herd, a more efficient cow herd, and really more longer term, a more profitable cow herd. You know, if you analyze economic data from the cow-calf sector, and you analyze and really identify the two major drivers behind profit for the commercial cow-calf producer, you'll find that reproductive efficiency and feed costs are the two main drivers. And we know that, you know, reproductive efficiency, or the ability of that cow to conceive and calve on a 365 interval or less, is a lowly heritable trait, which really, of course, means the environment or the nutrition and really the relative efficiency of that cow has a tremendous effect on the reproductive success of that herd. So, you know, I guess, at least to my way of thinking, if we want to start improving beef efficiency, we're going to have to go to the main stakeholders, the commercial cow-calf producer. We're going to have to be ready to really demonstrate the value proposition, or, you know, the return on investment to them and to their cow herd, and how we can make their cows more efficient and more profitable. If we can do this, you know, the genetics from a more efficient cow herd, that base commercial cow-calf industry, are going to spill over into other sectors of this industry. You know, ultimately, we do realize, of course, you know, change can occur, and feed efficiency is not going to improve without tremendous support across the industry. And so it's going to take support from all of our key industry leaders and stakeholders and partners. You know, so I'll just kind of list, you know, we've got to get breed associations, our genetic suppliers, our universities, seed stock producers, kind of all on board, and maybe trying to rethink and refocus our efforts around feed efficiency, if it's something our industry truly wants to improve upon. So that, guys, that's kind of what we have for today's webinar. Again, we greatly appreciate you joining us. If you're joining us from the United States, of course, coming up on Memorial Day weekend, we wish all of our audience a safe and happy Memorial Day, and appreciate you joining us today. But this time we'll take any questions that you guys have.
Thanks, Ted. We only have a couple questions here. The first one is, what are the expected lifespans of SmartFeed and GreenFeed systems?
Yeah, so a good question, and I'll answer that, I guess, that we feel like we've got systems that are certainly able to be out there 20 plus years without any doubt. Scott Zimmerman and Pat, our president and CEO, are on this call. And certainly we have had our GreenFeed system out for about a decade. And so from a longevity standpoint, those systems are still running well. And those systems are perhaps really more technically oriented than even our SmartFeed systems are. And so I feel like, you know, we have the opportunity to keep systems out there for at least 20 years, and maybe certainly beyond that. And certainly the other thing to consider is the way we structure our service contracts is that we're going to keep those units and those components working flawlessly for the life of that machine. And so if you keep that unit for 20 plus years, and again, something structurally is wearing out, we're going to take care of that and keep that unit functioning as it should. I don't know if Scott or Pat would have anything to add to that, but
Ted, I think you said it perfectly.
Okay.
All right.
So,
the next question. This is a really
operate for a long time.
The next question. This is a really good question. And they ask, when calculating average daily gain from SmartScale versus Chute Wt, are the animals ranked in the same order with both systems?
Good question. And so from the data that we've looked at is we see some rearranging across that data set. And so the example I showed of that one individual animal was of his average daily gain improving using the SmartScale. But we have other instances where those animals actually decrease, of course. And so again, using that chute-based weight as a single observation, you have the opportunity for variation to occur and for those animals to be perhaps heavier or lighter than what our SmartScale would say, just based off of those kind of the gut feel and some of the conditions of weighing. So most definitely we see variation around that. If you look again at kind of that trend across that set of pins that we showed in the first slide of data, certainly on average, I would tend to think that the SmartScale is going to tend to likely show that those animals are truly heavier than what your chute weight would indicate. But that is a great question. Thanks for asking that.
Yep, and I just want to elaborate that the general trend in the ranking is similar, but there are a few that are out of order.
Exactly.
Okay, the next question, what is the within-day weight ranges one might expect? Is this data available or just the daily means?
So the within-day weight ranges on the SmartScale, and so you can see some pretty big swings just looking at single-day SmartScale data. And that data is it's available for you to look at, and it's your data. But most definitely, from a practical application of that technology, we need to be able to average daily weights and then aggregate those average daily weights over a period of time to really make some valid data comparisons. And so I think if you look at just picked one date, one observation of the SmartScale, again, that's kind of like just comparing it to that one chute weight. But most definitely the trend line is going to be much more accurate using those SmartScales and just being able to average all of those observations we're able to obtain and really compute a more true weight of that animal and the performance of that animal. So hope I answered that correctly and that makes sense.
Yep, and I do want to just mention that, you can see each visit on the SmartScales, and you can see whether it was included in the average or not, and due to an animal not being fully standing on the scale, but you can see each visit and the daily average.
Right.
All right. The next question is, do the SmartScales require and come with a service contract similar to the feeders?
So yes, they do. And so again, all of our systems require a service contract. And so with that service contract, if we're talking about the SmartScale, again, it's going to cover all of those components of the SmartScale. But again, more importantly, it's covering those costs related to the data transfer and really the login user interface that you'll have access to view that data, download reports, just like you would with SmartFeed, Super SmartFeed, or our green feed system. So yeah, good question. And yeah, it is a service contract is used with our SmartScale as well.
All right, here's the next question. Can the SmartScale be set up to also monitor water intake?
Yeah, great question. And so we have the opportunity and the ability to measure water intake using our SmartFeed Pro system that we kind of discussed last week. And so if the question is really, can we measure water intake, the SmartFeed Pro system is going to be the system that we adapt for that. And so again, that a SmartFeed Pro system would have an exclusion gate that looks very similar and kind of designed to the SmartFeed bunk system that we talked about today. But that SmartFeed Pro would have that exclusion gate, and we would adapt that feed bin to hold water, and then we would have a solenoid based valve system that fills that water tank. And so the water tank would be filled to a constant mass, and then the animal would be allowed access to drink water from that tank or from that bin of the SmartFeed Pro. And upon that animal leaving that water and consuming that water, the exclusion gate door would close. The mass disappearance from that water bin would be measured, And then the solenoid would activate the valve to refill that water tank to that constant mass. And so the next animal would then come in after that water tank has been refilled. And so that's the system we use for measuring water intake. And the other opportunity that we would have along with that system would be to adapt a SmartScale system that would sit in front of that, so we can capture the animal weight and then the animal water intake right there together in a pin-based setting. So I think that hopefully that answered your question, but yeah, that's a great one as well.
All right, thanks, Ted. The next question is, how well does the partial scale handle ice and frozen manure buildup, especially during early spring thaw and freeze cycles?
And maybe Scott would be a good one to kind of weigh in. And so I think our experience would say that ice can prevent or can show some issues with those scale systems, much like it might with other scale systems. Probably the thing to consider is that if as long as those animals are only going to that water and placing their front 2 feet on the water, there shouldn't be a tremendous amount of mud buildup there. There's going to be some, no doubt, but if the ground is frozen, hopefully we're limiting the amount of mud that gets tracked. So I think in all reality, there's going to be some more maintenance kind of through those freezing periods to make sure those scales are fairly clean. And of course, we have a reduced amount of ice buildup that would be around those scale systems through those time periods.
To my knowledge, I don't remember having issue with ice with our scale to date. So we've tried to design it to minimize interference and the chance of mud getting down between the load cells and the platform where it would really cause problems.
Yeah, I agree. There was some early concern that it might have been a problem, but we have not seen an issue yet. All right, the next question. What is the typical time frame for cattle to learn to go to the feeder?
I think in a dry lot scenario or a pin-based scenario where the smart feed is where the feed is located, cattle learn pretty quick that obviously it's not something they have to learn to open a door. There's no really any restriction to that. As long as they're kind of willing to place their head through the head stanchion, they can reach in and receive feed. So adaptation's really pretty quick. From a standard testing procedure, we recommend at least a 10-day adaptation period to the smart feeders, as well as to the testing diets. And BIF would probably recommend upwards of a 3-week acclimation or warm-up period for those animals. And certainly we have to be monitoring and making sure those animals have all found the feed. They all are using the system. But acclimation is really pretty short. Those animals will learn in a very short couple-day time frame that the feed's located in the bin, and that's where they're going to have to go to eat. So it's really pretty easy for those animals to adapt to it.
All right, that's it for the questions. Thanks, Ted.
All right, that's great questions. Greatly appreciate your participation here today. If you have other questions or would like more information about any of our systems, would like more information about our equipment grant opportunity, again, feel free to reach out, contact us. Easy way to get a hold of us is call the office, but certainly also any of those questions or information inquiries can go to contact@clockinc.com. But appreciate it. Everyone have a safe and happy holiday weekend here, and look forward to visiting with you again, and kind of stay tuned to our social media pages and our web page for some other upcoming webinar opportunities and opportunities to to learn more about our systems and research as well as industry applications. Thanks again, guys, and have a great day.